I'd like to welcome you to the first of today's deep dive sessions, Responsible Purchasing in Practice. Hosting this session is Lisa Seuss, Head of Industry Alignment at Fairware, and she will be joined by two expert contributors, Sophie Ferretti, who is Project Coordinator at the Common Framework for Responsible Purchasing Practices, and Hayden Cornish-Jenkins from Equip.
What we will do in the next few minutes is give a quick overview why this topic is so important to HRDD and also what we as Fairware have in our portfolio. Then we will do a part where we can dig a bit deeper into what the Academy offers and also hear where some of you in the audience might be in your own journey. And then I will hand it over to Sophie and Hayden, who will speak on a practical example. So let's dive in together. As I think the quote was actually already read out in the intro for the sessions, I'm not going to reread it, but indeed to emphasize that we really as Fairware believe and have believed for a very long time that purchasing practices are absolutely central to any progress on labor conditions and progress in your supply chains. We see, and it's also been documented well at this point in academic research, that there's a strong link between how a brand plans their production, calculates their pricing, and generally interacts with their suppliers in how those suppliers are then able to provide good labor conditions to their workers. So, for example, if your order volumes are stable and if your suppliers can rely on when those orders are going to come in, of course, they are then in a better position to plan working hours in a way that do not rely on excessive overtime. The pressure on workers would go down, which decreases harassment and especially also gender-based harassment. Obviously, if prices are calculated fairly, then workers are able to receive a higher wage, but also other investments in anything, right? Fire doors, we had that with COVID, for masks and other equipment. Anything that would require a financial investment to improve working conditions is obviously connected to the price. And because of the strong connection between brands' practices and labor conditions in the supply chain, we really, as Fairware, believe that human rights due diligence is not going to be impactful unless a brand adopts responsible purchasing. But it is not only Fairware who believes that, but it's also now reflected in the CSDDD, which we are very happy about, that the strong mention to purchasing practices has made it into the final text. I'm not going to read out the whole slide. This is just to briefly highlight that there are several links in the legislation. One being the stipulation that your HRDD policy needs to link to purchasing and your own procurement practices, and then specifically the connection to a living wage is also highlighted, which of course we as Fairware also see as a strong link. And then purchasing practices or specific practices of the wider portfolio of purchasing do come back across the entire legislation. Some references to contracts. There's a specific stipulation that you cannot shift risk only to your suppliers, and in many other places also. So it's clear, CSDDD is quite clear that this is really something brands need to adopt in their human rights due diligence. I would like to give a quick overview what our current portfolio as Fairware is on this topic. And because we have been working on this for a very long time, it is quite extensive. Could I see the next slide, please? Thank you. Before I go deeper into the practical tools and the guidance we provide, I do want to highlight that we are operating under the umbrella of the Common Framework for Responsible Purchasing, which we have developed together with a large number of other organizations in this space as a common reference point, defining across 5 principles what responsible purchasing is, so that we all have a common language and a common understanding what we mean by that term. And the Common Framework also defines a number of practices that brands can adopt. And it is a bit technical, but we do feel that it is important to have that joint umbrella, so that also if you are engaging with other organizations in the sector or use tools that link to purchasing, it is all working towards the same goal and it's based on the same common understanding. So that has been very important to us, and we've also learned a lot from the engagement with other organizations. Next to this aligned language and the umbrella of the Common Framework, we do offer an extensive amount of guidance on the practical implementation. So not only the definition, but then also if you do practically want to work on, let's say, overtime or a responsible exit, how to manage your production and so on. And there's a number of guidance that is at your disposal. And we will in a second move a bit deeper into what that looks like in the Academy. We do have a significant portfolio specifically around pricing, which we call the Fair Price methodology. And there's also the Fair Price app, which allows fact-based costing for suppliers, but then linked to the brand's responsibility under human rights due diligence to connect it to their own pricing. So that has been an important area of work for us. And I also do want to highlight that we engage extensively with manufacturers in production countries and manufacturer associations, including the Sustainable Terms of Trade initiative, because we do want to make sure that everything we bring across and also everything that is highlighted in the Academy is informed by the needs of suppliers as well, and not just from our own experience or the perspective of the brand. So this is a brief overview of how we have been working on this topic. And I would now like to move deeper into the Academy and invite all of you to open Slido. So you can see the website here. I think some of you have already used it in the previous sessions. So you can see the code here again, 2891582. And I will give it a moment to make sure everyone can move into it. And then maybe we can see the first question, and I will introduce the question and allow people to get Slido up and running. If you could see the next slide, or I think the tech team might also move us over to Slido in a moment. So the first question I would like to ask the audience: in your current practices, do you have written contracts in place with your partners, your supply partners, that allow the implementation of human rights due diligence through a shared responsibility approach? So this is not only about having written contracts, but whether there is some sort of stipulation or clause in your contract that would define shared responsibility. So not passing on, not saying there's a code of conduct and you as a supplier need to adhere to it, but also outlining how you as a brand will contribute to that. And you can click yes or no. I'm going to give it a moment, and I'm assuming the tech team will alert us when some answers have come in. Yes, so I can see that some people have answered it. Yeah, and indeed,
Hi, Lisa. Just to say that the sound has been cut at the moment, so if you could wait a second while the tech team tries to deal with it, that would be great. It would be nice to hear you.
presentation, because I think maybe that's why. And anyway, I have to show the resources next.
Right, Lisa, you're back. We can hear you again.
Amazing. My voice is no longer silenced. That's great. Yeah, so the poll is quite indicative in one direction. And then if we can go back to the presentation and look at the resources we have linked to this topic, then I can walk the participants through that. Yeah, so like I was saying, of course, this is a fairly new development, but we expect that this will also be quite prominent in the forthcoming legislation. And we do have extensive resources around the topic of responsible contracting. We've been partnering with the Responsible Contracting Project on this, which has resulted in an extensive guidance that really walks you through how you can make contracts with your suppliers HREDD proof. And it's very detailed, also referencing good practices and holding you by the hand in how this can be implemented. And that includes the, which you can also see on the slide, the buying contract tool. So this is more specifically if you then want to draft the contract, and it's directly linked to the Responsible Contracting Project and their model contract clauses, and will be updated as that process also progresses. So that's on responsible contracting, and there are more questions and actions around that in the HRDD Academy itself. But just to touch upon and saying that this is an important area where we provide guidance in the Academy. And then if we can move to the second question, let's see how it goes with the sound. This is about whether you have a sourcing strategy in place that focuses on maintaining long-term business relationships with your suppliers. And again, you can say yes or no. Let's give everyone a moment. Yeah, the poll is already up. Am I still audible at this point? Okay.
We can hear you, Lisa.
Yes, that's great. I'm just trying to see the results that are coming in. Yeah, so here the picture is a bit more balanced, or maybe only a few people have answered, I don't know, going on what I can see on the slide. But the majority does seem to have a sourcing strategy in place, focused on long-term relationships. And that is obviously a very important precondition, so good job on those who do have it in place. Let's give it another second, but I think this is roughly the picture we're looking at. It's interesting, it's almost flipped compared to the contracting one. If you can go back to the presentation, then you can have a look at the resources we offer here. So this is specifically around sourcing dialogue, which is not only about long-term relationships, but it is generally talking about how you can maintain a good sourcing dialogue with your suppliers, what kind of questions you can bring up, the approach around it, and it also offers concrete tools, both for situations where you're starting with a new supplier, as well as if you are already in a relationship, what kind of questions you could bring up and who's also best placed to answer them. And that is a topic next to the contracting, or it's strongly linked to contracting, but it goes beyond only the contracts and really making sure you have an ongoing dialogue with your suppliers. Those are two examples of areas we do cover in the Academy with concrete guidance and tools, really step by step, based on practical experience. And we also cover that on many, many more topics. But today we thought it would be more relevant that you don't only hear from us, but also from one of our leader member brands. And I'm very happy that Hayden from Equip has agreed to join us here today. Welcome, along with my colleague Sophie, who is one of our technical experts and who will interview Hayden on their experience as Equip on actually improving their purchasing practices on some of the topics we touched upon and also more generally. So I'm handing over to Sophie and Hayden. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so
Sound issue there. So the tech team is trying to deal with another sound issue, so we will be back shortly, I hope. Hi, you are back in the
I am
room.
back.
Please go ahead.
Great to hear that. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, Lisa, again for the introduction. Really happy to be here, and I'm excited to dive into today's case study with Hayden from Equip Outdoor Technologies. So let's kick things off right away. Hayden, I'd like to begin by asking whether you have evaluated as a brand your supplier agreements to assess their impact on human rights. Over to you.
Yeah, so I think, as Mariette already mentioned, we know that there is a power imbalance when it comes to our relationship with our suppliers. And so what we need to recognize is that our purchasing practices and our sourcing practices can both be pitfalls for us where we unduly place pressure on our suppliers, but they're also an opportunity for us to show that we're a responsible business and actually go above and beyond. So at Equip, what we have is a supplier manual instead of a legally binding contract. And that's signed by all of our suppliers when we start working with them, and we reissue it every year to make amends for legislation or procedural changes. And importantly, in that manual, we are committing to having responsible practices and pointing out exactly what that means and giving clear examples and what they can expect from us. So we reference our responsible business conduct policy, and also we reference the Fair Wear Code of Labour Practices. But equally, it also sets out what we expect from them in return. So it's an important two-way relationship through our supplier manual that we both commit to be responsible businesses together.
That's really interesting. Thank you so much. It's great to see that the Fair Wear Code of Labor Practices is integrated into your supplier manual, as that shows really your commitment to shared responsibility in upholding labor standards. Now, regarding your payment terms, are they standard or explicitly agreed upon with suppliers before production?
So we always agree the payment terms with a supplier when we first start onboarding them. And we find that payment terms differ between suppliers. Our position is that we will always be as flexible as we can to meet the supplier's payment terms. We know that in our industry, 1 month or 2 month delays in payments can be common. That's not something that we do at our business. Most of our suppliers will request payment within 2 weeks or 30 days. We actually aim to have no delay in payment. So once we receive the bill of lading, our finance team will process the invoice and we'll pay the supplier within a day or two. We also do prepay or provide deposits for some suppliers where they require it. This is particularly important for suppliers where they have to have upfront purchase of materials in order to make the product. And so their upfront investment is higher, and therefore in these situations, we will always prepay or provide deposits where required.
Thank you so much, Hayden. It sounds like your flexibility really supports your suppliers, which is wonderful. Now I'd like to ask you whether you pay your suppliers directly or whether you pay them via an intermediary. And if it is through an intermediary, do you know their payment terms?
So the bulk of our production, over 95%, goes directly through a supplier. So we try our best to avoid any intermediaries, purely because we know that it causes issues with communication, but also our ability to monitor the working conditions and the practices within those suppliers. We do have 2 suppliers that are currently still sourced through intermediaries. And of course, we are paying that intermediary with the responsible payment terms that I've already described. But this year we conducted a gap analysis based on Fair Wear's recommendation, actually, using the common framework of responsible purchasing practices. And we looked at our purchasing practices across the board and compared it to this best practice guidance. And we identified one of our weaknesses was that we weren't actually reviewing our intermediaries' payment terms. So although we were paying our intermediaries straight away, we haven't had evidence to show that those intermediaries are paying the suppliers quickly as well. So that's something that our buying team are now working on over this season.
Thanks, Hayden. It's great to hear that you're using the common framework for responsible purchasing practices as a benchmark, and that you're using it also to identify areas for improvement, especially around deferred payments. Now I'd like to ask you, what strategies do you have to avoid putting pressure on factories?
Well, Equip Outdoor Technologies, we own 2 outdoor brands. So the outdoor business is primarily seasonal. We have all of our sales tend to happen both in winter and in summer. And so what we could do is just have production cycles running up to each of those seasons. But this would really place a lot of pressure on our suppliers. We would see all of our orders and all of our volume going into just a few months of the year. And obviously that's going to be putting pressure on the factory, and the factory's only going to have to pass that on to the worker, which is not something that we want. So at Equip, what we commit to is to spreading out our production throughout the year, and allows them to avoid that pressure on the suppliers. So we have long lead times. We tend to have around 5-month lead time from the initial order to the shipment of the product. But also with our key suppliers, we have what we call continuous production plans. And these account for about 50% of our volume every year. And a continuous production plan allows the supplier to have a stable production volume every month of the year. So our team work with them to smooth out the demand and at lower troughs where there's less demand for products, they'll be working on our carryover styles, and in the lead up to higher demands where we're about to launch a new season, they'll be focusing on our key new styles that we'll be selling into that season. So really, it's about facilitating the work with that supplier to allow them to ease the pressure and spread out the production throughout the year, so we don't have to rely on excessive overtime.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That sounds like a really proactive approach, giving suppliers such advanced notice and building in extra time. Could you share more about how do you know about the factory's production capacity and the capacity needed for your orders?
Yeah, so I can't take any credit for all of this because our buying team are fantastic. They spend a lot of time working with our suppliers. They are in touch with most of our suppliers weekly, if not daily, some of them. It's all about good communication between us and them and being honest and forecasting as much as we can. So every 6 months at a minimum, but normally quarterly, we'll be asking them to forecast their capacity that they can make available for us as a business. So what are their volumes that they can produce? And in return, we'll be forecasting what production volumes we will be placing at the factory. And so it's about finding out that they can match. And if they don't match, so for example, maybe we forecasted a few months ago that the volumes would be higher than they are now. Well, we need to have a look at how do we work with that factory? How do we have the regular check-ins to see what production volume can be moved around? Can we bring stuff forwards that was going to be made later in the year? Or vice versa, if we have really high peaks at certain times, can we spread that out and delay some of the less urgent products so that they get spread to a further time? So it's a really clear communication between us, which is key, and allowing them to be honest with us and telling us early on if they are above capacity currently and they need to delay shipments. And that's not a problem for us. It just allows our team in the buying department to reprioritize and kind of reorganize that production and the delivery.
Thank you so much. It's really great to hear that you have such bilateral and regular communication with your suppliers. And how do you deal with unforeseen delays in production, like material delays, for example?
Yeah, so I think we always plan for the best, but know that that's never going to happen, and there will always be delays in our industry. And I think we've seen globally many more delays over the last few years, particularly with freight and disruptions, particularly in the countries that we source from. So delays do happen, and for us, it's not that they happen, but it's how do we respond to them that we can minimize the impact. And when I say minimize the impact, both on our business in terms of us getting our goods to our retailers in time, but also minimizing the impact on our suppliers, because it's not fair to punish a supplier for something that's completely out of their control. So really what's most important to us is finding out what was the cause of the delay and if anyone was at fault. So for example, with material delays, that could be the fabric mill. They could be at fault. They could have manufactured our fabric late, and then they would have passed on that product to the factory that was finishing the final product, and it'd be unfair to penalize the factory. So in this case, what we'll do is normally air freight the product to make up the time, and we will ask the fabric mill to cover the cost or cover part of the cost. Equally, it could have been our factory that maybe prioritized another brand's orders, or they made decisions which delayed their own production. And in these cases, we would ask them to pay their share of the air freight if we felt and we both agreed that it was their responsibility. To be honest, most of the time, it is out of everyone's control. It is delays in freight, it's delays at the port, it is weather events, it is Red Sea crossing. There's many issues that are affecting it that are not in the control of either tiers of our supply chain. And in these scenarios, Equip always covers the cost. So we will air freight that product if we have to, because we need to make up time and it's an urgent product that needs to be at our retailers, but we will cover the cost of that air freight. We will not place that, push that onto our suppliers unfairly.
Thank you so much, Hayden, for sharing that. That sounds like a fair and balanced way to handle delays. I think we have time for one more question. So I'd like to ask you if you could share any recent initiatives you have made to improve your purchasing practices.
Yeah, so I think we are relatively confident that we have good purchasing practices and are trying to achieve the best. But what we realized was that was based on anecdotal feedback from our suppliers, and we hadn't had the chance to give suppliers the opportunity to provide us with feedback across the business. And so what we launched this summer was a supplier sourcing practices feedback survey. So all of our suppliers in our tier 1 supply chain have been offered the chance to give us anonymous feedback on each stage of our production with them. So whether that's product development, forecasting, ordering, and payment terms. And we've asked them to give us feedback, scoring us out of 5, but also if there's any recommendations that we can take on board. So we're looking forward to working through that with our buying department actually this month and seeing what improvements we can implement.
Thank you so much, Hayden. It's really positive and great to see that you're actively seeking supplier feedback and integrating it into your decision-making process in order to enhance your practices. I think this kind of collaboration can really make a difference in driving progress. I think we are short on time, so I'd like to thank you, Hayden, for coming here and sharing what Equip is doing on responsible purchasing. And I'm going to hand it back over to Lisa now. Thank you so much.
Thank you both very much. And yeah, thank you, Hayden, also for being so open about the progress you've made and how you work with your suppliers. It's great to hear. And of course, as Fairway, we also learn a lot from the members we engage with and from, yeah, also as Hayden has explained, there's a lot of learning on the job and as you progress in your own insights, right? Like then you notice that there might be gaps and that there are things you can improve on. And our own ambition, or what we're trying to do, is that what we see works with our members and in their supply chains in real life, in different business models, sizes, and needs, informs also what we put into our guidance and tools, so that it's not just us based on theoretical expertise put into those guidance and tools and so on, but that it's really built on the real life expertise on progressive and ambitious brands who are seriously committed to making HRDD work in their supply chain. So yeah, it was great to see how that can look like in practice. And yeah, I think this is the end almost of our session. Thank you very much for listening in. And thank you again, Sophie and Hayden, for giving us a real life example.